So, welcome everyone. For the newcomers, welcome to the Buying Your Home in The Hague webinar. A little apology up front. I had to escape to a cafe restaurant because the power was cut off in our office. So it might be a little bit noisy in the background. If you can't hear me or if I speak too quickly, please let me know. My name is Kimo. I am the founder of Expat Housing Network. I am half Dutch, half Caribbean. I'm a proud father of a daughter who's 4 years old, but she thinks she's 16. I bought my own home about 5 years ago. But it took me a while to do that. By the way, I wasn't in the business back then. And the market was still quite competitive back then, but it took me 7 offers before I got my final offer accepted. Honestly, if I knew then what I know now, things would have looked differently, of course, and hopefully I'll be able to share some of that information with you guys today. Again, if you have any questions, pop them in the chat. If you can't hear me, or if I need to speak up, or if I need to speak a little bit slower, please also put it in the chat. So today we're going to talk about a few things. We're going to talk about introduction of Expat Housing Network, of course, and about the right mindset of getting into this market, about how much you need to save to actually start with buying a home, and several tips to actually win in the market. And then I'll talk a little bit more about the timeline of purchasing a property. But before we talk about all of that, let's talk a little bit more about Expat Housing Network. And honestly, greatness is achieved in the agency of others. That means that my team is the rock and the kind of like the cornerstone of our business. If you decide to move forward with us, then most likely you'll be in touch with one of my team members. They'll help you out. We're from all over the world, so we know what it's like to move to a new country. We're not traditional real estate agents, so that means we don't have a background in real estate. We do have a lot of experience with real estate. Ah, that's nice. The sun is shining. We don't have a background in real estate, but we do have a lot of experience. The other difference is that we focus on helping you find a home. We don't sell properties. We don't rent properties out. What that means is that why I always say this is because if you compare us to a real estate agent who has a client that both rents and or both sells and buys properties. Right now it's a seller's market, so most likely you'll be on the short end of the stick because in their information or their attention most likely will gravitate towards the easier deal, which is selling properties. Okay, we don't do that. We focus on helping you buy a home, and we've become pretty good at that. We also charge a fixed fee, no commission. We don't believe in you having to pay more if you're already paying more for the property. And like I mentioned, we know what it's like to settle into a new country. We've also lived abroad or are from abroad, and we know what it's like to move to the Netherlands, set up a home here, settle, but also buy a home. And all of my colleagues have now helped numerous people buy and purchase property in the Netherlands and in The Hague as well. What's our added value? So selling agents take our offers more seriously because we can do the due diligence, so they'll know that we won't back out easily. Also, we can sometimes book in viewings when it's no longer possible. We support by reviewing the Dutch legal property documents and also the contracts. And one of the most important things, we help with defining the market value. Why is that important? I'll talk about that a little bit further down the line. We also will share more information about rules and regulations on the housing market. And of course, we will make sure you don't make the same mistakes that technically I made when I first bought my own home. Okay, so the mind state, getting into the right mindset is important because the market is competitive at the moment. Before I tell you a little bit more about the mindset, I would like to share a few numbers. Um, Currently for sale properties in The Hague, about 1940. Average housing price is about 440,000 euros. And the average day to sale, and this is probably the most important one, is 15 days. What does that mean? From the moment it comes on Funda to the moment it's sold, 15 days. That is a very, very, very short period. That means that a lot is crammed into those 14, 15 days. And honestly, if you ask me, I believe it's very strange that you make such a big decision based, for example, on one viewing. A lot of people do that, and that's why you want to make sure that you do your due diligence. That's why you want to make sure you do proper research before you actually go into this market. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Also, looking at the price developments over the last several years, we're seeing that around 2012, 2013, there was a small dip, most likely because of the GFC, the global financial crisis. And then since then, or technically since 2014-15, prices have gone up. And I expect them to still go up in the foreseeable future. Why am I sharing this information? Is because a lot of the questions that we get is like, is it a good time to buy? Of course, if I had a glass ball and say, yes, this is the perfect time to buy, I would be sitting here with a very beachy background instead of a rocky background in this case. I would probably still give this webinar because I like helping people out. But what I always say is, okay, hey, what are the conditions that drive prices up or downwards? Um, First of all, it's the fiscal benefits. So the government has created tax exemptions for home buyers that are buying for the first time. So if you're younger than 35, if you're buying up to 400,000 euros, and if you haven't used this exemption before, then you get to benefit from this, which means that you don't have to pay 2% transfer tax. That could be a lot of money. It could be 8,000, 6,000, 10,000 euros, depending on how much money you're spending on your property. Um, Interest rebate, that's also important. So you pay interest over your mortgage. At the end of the year, you have to do taxes, right? So you have to file for your income taxes. The interest that you pay on your mortgage is deductible off your taxable income. So that means that you'll get about what 30 to 40% of that money back. Also, there's no capital gain. So people that are buying properties, making a profit, and then selling properties can actually directly invest that money back into the housing market. Why are these three important? Because suddenly it's very interesting to actually buy a home, to own a home, and to sell a home and then rebuy a home. So we see that, and we see that benefit, or we see that effect it has it on the housing market, and prices are continuously going up. This is not going to change anytime soon. There's a liberal government in place in the Netherlands, and their constituency is consisting of people that own homes or want to buy homes. So they're not going to change this anytime soon. There is increased pressure from the EU on this, but I don't see this changing anytime soon. Then don't forget low interest rates. I think they're between 1.5 to 2%, which is historically low. I can remember that they were on 4 or 5%, and I also know stories that they were on 10%, which is about what 15, 20 years ago. So these interest rates make it very, very interesting to buy a home. Money is cheap at the moment, and also high rents. I think some of you are actually currently renting, and the rents are increasing. Well, technically they're decreasing the last couple of months, but they're still quite high. And I think that with the borders opening up again, with more people coming into the country, I think that we'll see rents increase again in the next 6 to 12 months. The last one is lack of supply. So market demand and supply. There's currently more people wanting to buy a home than there's people actually selling homes. What that means, I think that right now you have 1.3 property to choose from per person that wants to buy a home. That is crazy. It used to be like 4 to 5 properties. So what that means is that that's only going to drive prices up more. Why am I sharing this? Because if you buy today, then most likely next year and the year after that, you'll see the price increase. Of course, there's always kind of like a not a full disclosure, but it's always a something to kind of like take into account, and that is there's macroeconomical things that might impact the housing market, or there might be new regulations that are not on the horizon yet, but that might be introduced next year or the year thereafter, right? So it's very difficult to say what it exactly will do. But if we look at also the banking reports, they'll say that this year the price will increase about 7 to 10%. Next year will be closer to 4 to 5%, and the year afterwards, who knows, right? But if you buy a property, don't buy it for the short term. Don't buy it for 2 to 3 years. Buy it for 5 plus years, right? Even if you don't know where you'll be 5 years from now, maybe you'll be able to rent out your property. But if you buy for 2 to 3 years, then it's most likely speculating. If you want to speculate short term, Ah, I wouldn't necessarily advise that. Properties in the long run are a good investment asset. So if you want to build up some equity, if you want to benefit from well lower costs because you're not renting and you're not spending money or flushing money down the drain for a landlord, then I definitely think buying could be a good thing for you, even though prices are increasing already. So that's a little bit about getting right into the right mind state, right? Make sure that you understand, okay, hey, we're not necessarily at the peak of the market, but even if we were, buy for a longer period of time. What would you need in savings to actually start? So this is a list, and there's three columns. One is the type of cost. The second one is the amount, and the third one is if whether it's tax deductible. So again, at the end of the year, you have to do your income tax. What the government has said is they want to make it for you, or make it interesting for you to actually use specialists when it comes to anything related to a mortgage. Why? It's a complex product, and you want to make sure that you don't um, stay uninformed about it. So what they've done is anything that's related to a mortgage is tax deductible. Let's quickly go over these transfer tax. I talked about that a little bit earlier, 2% of the purchase price. But if you're younger than 35, buying a property up to 400,000 euros, and if you've not used the exemption before, then you would not have to pay this amount. Tax deductible, unfortunately not. The notary will draw off the mortgage deed and transfer deed, but only the mortgage deed costs are tax deductible. The bank is tax deductible, or the mortgage broker. By the way, I would definitely advise you to talk to both. Why? We'll talk about that in a few. A typical real estate agent, they charge 1 to 2% of the purchase price. We don't. We charge a fixed fee. It's nonsense that you pay more if you're already paying more for the property. Unfortunately, we are not tax deductible yet because we're not linked to the mortgage. The appraiser is tax deductible because the bank will not give you a mortgage without an appraisal report. The technical inspector is not tax deductible. Interpreter also not, but the interpreter is mandatory. The technical inspector is not. The bank guarantee, I don't know why this is bigger than the others other letters, but it's not necessarily more important. It's not tax deductible, but the mortgage guarantee, if you were to purchase a property with a market value of up to 325,000 euros, you'd be able to benefit from the mortgage guarantee, which means that if you'd have to sell because you lose your job or you lose a partner, or God forbid that happens, of course, and the value of the property is lower than the actual mortgage that you took out, then the mortgage guarantee covers that difference. So this is what happens in the global financial crisis. A lot of the property values sank, and then people were forced to sell because they lost their jobs, and suddenly they were left with a debt. The National Mortgage Guarantee decided to solve that issue, so they instated this guarantee after that. Luckily, this is tax deductible. Okay, so now you know that the prices will most likely go up in the near foreseeable future. So the next year, most likely next 2 years, who knows what happens after that? Most likely it might increase. But if there's a dip, there might be a small dip because the housing market's more solid than it was in 2008. Now you also know what you need in savings besides like the amount that you need in savings for the closing fees. That's what we call them. I would also advise you to save some money to actually put up towards your property because it's relatively competitive at the moment. So people are bidding more than the market value. Why is that important? We'll talk about that in a few. Now I'm going to share a few more tips to actually win in the current housing market. By the way, if there's any questions that you have, pop them in the chat, because I'm happy to answer any of them. Whew, I think I talk quite quickly. Let me take a sip. So the first one is market value. Value, value, value. Why is this important? Okay, this is a property in The Hague, and it's on the market for 395,000 euros. By the way, this is actually a live property. It's on the market right now. Okay, so what a lot of people ask me is, okay, how much should I overbid over the asking price? Then I tell them, okay, don't look at the asking price too much. Use it kind of like as a reference to find properties that are within your budget, but don't use it as a reference to actually define what you want to purchase the property for. Why is that? Well, this is the case. So this is an overview. Normally they should pop up one by one, but now you see the full overview. So the asking price of this property is 395,000 euros. The asking price, however, is the price that the agent, so the selling agent, puts up the property for. And the selling agent is completely free to define whatever he wants. So he could put up for 395 or 450 for 370. So it's very, very subjective. Of course, he's not going to stray away too much from the market value, but there's agents that actually do that. So let's say he puts it up for, let's say he puts it up for 395 and the market value, however, is 415, but the purchase price of this property, so somebody buys it for 435. Then what you see is that the difference between asking price and purchase price is 40K, which is about 10%, right? Then you have the market value, and the difference between market value and purchase price is about 20K, which is 5%. Let's use agent number two. Agent number two puts the property up for less than the other agent, but it's still the same property. He has the same market value, and the purchase price, because people are paying for the property the same thing, is 435. However, difference between asking and purchase price is 60K, which is about 16%. And the difference between market value and the purchase price has not changed whatsoever. If everybody starts using this narrative, then people are going to overbid by 15, 16, at some point 20%, because hey, that's what they heard. They look at the asking price, they don't look at the market value, and then based on the asking price, they say, okay, I need to overbid by this much. Because the asking price is not a set given, it's something that the selling agent can define. I wouldn't look at that too much. Look at the market value. How do you define the market value? By looking at properties sold in the last 6 to 12 months that are comparable, right? So comparable in size, comparable location, comparable in setup. So for example, you don't compare a property that has a garden with a property that's on the second floor. and then you look at the market values or the purchase price of those properties, and then you take an average of that, and there's maybe some extra conditions. For example, the property I just showed you is really well done, it's recently renovated, so if you compare it to a property that's in a worse condition, then most likely you'll have to up the value a little bit. Look at that, and then you'll exit or you'll find out the market value. We can help you with that. There's also the land registry that can support you with that, but it's a bit of a puzzle there. And then based on your market value, define, okay, hey, so how much do I think I need to pay for this property to actually make have a chance or make a competitive offer. Sometimes you have to overbid a little bit. Sometimes you can actually bid the actual market value. It depends on the property, but don't look at asking price so much. So focus on value, 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 value. That's the first thing. The second thing is a winning offer. So what does a winning offer consist of? So it's a good price, but it's not always the highest price. Let's go to the next slide, right? So let's say this property that we saw, you're submitting an offer, but you're submitting an offer for 460,000 euros. Okay, what is good to know is the bank will only give you this amount. If you offer for 60, then you need to have the difference in cash. So you need to have that 45,000 euros in cash to put up towards the property. Let's say the selling agent snuffs out that you don't have that money, then you could have offered the highest price, but you didn't get the property because the selling agent will want to know that you can move forward, right? So offer a good, realistic price, not always the highest price. Offer security to the seller. Why is that important? Because the seller will want to know that you can move forward. They don't want to end up maybe 2 or 3 months down the line figuring out that you can't move forward and they have to start the process all over again. Especially selling agents don't want that because I'm not sure if they're a big fan of working. Also, offer the least amount of hassle. So you can ask a lot from the seller, but if you compare your offer to somebody else who's asking relatively little, then most likely they'll go for an offer that has little or less hassle in it for them than the other properties, than the other offers. To give you an example, we had a case where a client wanted to have the property painted and a lot of the things fixed, and we told them, okay, hey, if you do that, then if we have a competitive offer for somebody else who's asking not that, then most likely the seller will go for the easier route. And currently, it's a competitive market, so it means that there'll be multiple offers on a property. So you need to really define what you want to do. Some things that are critical, for example, fixing the boiler or something like that, you could actually ask that. But when it comes to a lot of cosmetical things, also take into account, for example, the date that the seller wants to move out. So find out a little bit more from the seller. Okay, so why are you selling? But also, when do you want to move out? Because if the seller has bought something new and they can only move in the 1st of January next year, then you can put in your offer that you want to move in the 1st of October. But it's going to create hassle for the seller, right? Because he has to move out, he has to find storage, and then he has to move twice because first he has to move out to another place and then to his new place. So make sure you understand what is appealing for the seller. And by the way, in terms of offering security, what I mentioned before is share a little bit more about your due diligence, right? Share where you are in the process, for example, of getting a mortgage, or that you have money to put up towards the property, because that will lead to the seller having a little bit more faith and confidence in you actually being able to move forward. The last one is personal touch. Personal touch is important because a lot of the sellers have an emotional attachment with their property. So if you submit an offer and you don't share anything about yourself or how much you like the property, then most likely you'll not win the offer compared to somebody else who does. Also, if you look at, for example, a lot of investors who are submitting offers at the moment, then if you compare your offer to an investor's offer and the investor hasn't shared anything, and most likely the seller will not want to sell to an investor because they want to sell to somebody that actually can enjoy the property as they do, then most likely they'll pick your offer. But do share a little bit more about yourself, why you love the property, and a little bit of background information. Okay, so these four things create a proper and good offer. Okay, that's what I just went over. Then we have due diligence. So what is important is, especially in this market, is that you understand what you're buying, right? Like I mentioned, if the average days to sale is about 15, then you want to make sure that you understand what you're getting yourself into. It's probably one of the biggest investments that you'll make in a long time. So and it's not going to feel like that because it's very abstract. You never see the money like switch hands or anything like that. But make sure you understand what you're buying. There's two parties that can help you with that. Well, of course, we can help you with that, but the technical inspector will come into the property and they'll inspect the property and make sure that there's no kind of like hidden defaults or errors, and they'll flag and notify you of anything that should be fixed, needs to be fixed in the short, long term, or midterm. The appraiser will actually define the market value, the definite market value. The bank will not give you a mortgage if they haven't seen a report from the appraiser, right? What we do is we give you a preliminary market valuation range, and what the appraiser does is he gives the definite valuation range. Now, my question to you guys is, when do you book them? Do you book them before your offer is accepted, or do you book them after your offer is accepted? Please feel free to pop the answer in the chat if you have. Again, it's not mandatory. Just pop it in chat if you want. So, Maria says before you submit the offer. Anyone else? Okay. So Maria, I think it was a good call, but unfortunately, it wasn't the correct call. Why? Because if you submit an offer, you don't know if it's going to get accepted yet, right? So let's say you ask these guys to come in, like the technical inspector costs about $400, the appraiser about $600 to $700. So you'll pay $1,100 before you even know if your offer gets accepted. So what you do is you get them in after your offer is accepted. It's always a bit of a trick question. Why is that? Because um, I need to kind of like explain a little bit more about the timeline. So here you have your offer acceptance, right? A lot of people think that they're committed to the deal once their offer is accepted. That's not the case. By law, you have the right until 3 days after you sign the purchase contract to pull out, right? So we call that the cool off period. So let's say you wake up sweating in the middle of the night saying like, oh my God, what did I do? Then you'd be able to actually pull out of the deal without giving any reason. There might be some costs that you incurred, but if you get your offer accepted, that's when you actually want to start with the due diligence. So you want to get the appraiser in, you want to get the technical inspector in, and you want to make sure you get both reports before the cool off period ends. Because if you don't, then maybe you find out that the property is not worth as much as you thought it was, then the mortgage will give you less money, and then maybe you end up not being able to buy it. But you are committed after the cool-off period, so make sure you get the reports in before the cool-off period ends, and preferably even before you sign the purchase contract. So that's the due diligence part. Now let's talk about the timeline. So the part where I say between start search and offer getting accepted and is kind of like skewed because it could take a little bit longer. Sometimes it takes weeks, months. It depends a little bit what's on the market, what you're looking for, and how competitive a specific property is. So once you get your offer accepted, then have your due diligence done, right? Get the appraiser and technical inspector in, then you sign the purchase contract. This is the official agreement between you and the seller that you're going to buy under certain conditions, the seller's going to sell under certain conditions. So make sure you sign this purchase contract not too soon, but also not too late, because until this purchase contract is signed, the seller is not locked in. So the seller can also decide to pull out if he wants to, but after this contract is signed, the seller cannot pull out anymore. You, however, still have about 3 days to consider. The mortgage application starts after you sign the purchase contract, but don't wait to talk to these guys before until you sign a purchase contract. Talk to the mortgage broker before. Why would I advise to talk to a mortgage advisor? Is because they'll have access to a lot of different mortgage products. Where a bank is kind of like a retail shop, they'll try to sell you 2, 3 products. The mortgage advisor will sell you what, 40 products, but he'll not sell it to you. He's kind of like your personal shopper. He doesn't really care what you buy as long as you're happy with it, you understand what you're buying, and you look good in it as well. Huh? So get a chance to talk to them. They're a little bit more expensive, but it's tax deductible and it's definitely worth it. Then once the cool-off period ends, that's where kind of like the mortgage application is kind of like reviewed by the bank, and most likely it takes, especially now in summer, it takes about 3 to 4 weeks. So your mortgage application is approved. Then about 7 days before the transfer takes place, and transfer means you become the owner of the property. You get a final note or invoice from the notary, and what the notary will say is, okay, hey, so you have the purchase price, and then you have these closing fees, what we talked about earlier. So, and then you have, on the other hand, you have your mortgage, right? So the mortgage is deducted of this amount, and then you'll remain with a specific amount that still needs to be paid. That's what you need to transfer to the notary, and then once that has taken place, then there'll be the inspection, the final inspection. It takes place on the same day that you become the owner of the property, and then you have about 2 months to mention anything to the seller about the property that should have been disclosed upon transfer or before transfer. Why is this important? Let me give you an example. So we bought a property for somebody. It turned out that one of the power sockets wasn't working. They found out 3 days after they moved in. And of course, we didn't check all 70 power sockets when we did the inspection. That is not necessary. So when they moved in a couple of days later, they found out the power socket wasn't working. That's not necessarily a big thing, right? Maybe it was a little wire that was loose. But when they had an electrician come in, they said, okay, hey, you need to actually rewire part of this. We have to open up the wall, and it will cost about 1,500 to 2,000 euros. That is a big chunk. So we said, okay, hey, this is something that the seller should have disclosed. They forgot to do that. The seller lived in the property for 6 years, so he should have known that that power socket wasn't working, and therefore we held the seller liable. So you have about 2 months to do that, but don't wait too long, because if we would have said this 2 months afterwards, then it would have been very difficult for us to prove that this was already the case when they moved in. So don't wait too long. Try and figure it out within a week or so, or 2 weeks. And of course, sometimes you might be like painting and moving, so you can't use it, or you're not using the property as you would when you're living in it. But don't wait 2 months either. This is the timeline. It can take anywhere from 3 months to 6 months to 9 months. It depends a little bit on the actual properties that are on the market and where you're looking for. I'm getting a question from Maria. If we want to buy a house in 6 months, when should we start all procedures? So if you want to move into your new home in 6 months, I would already start the process, because most likely you'll spend a couple of weeks, months searching, securing the right property, and then the process between kind of like getting the purchase contract signed, or between getting your offer accepted and moving into the property, can take anywhere from 2 to 3 months. So I would already start the search right now, or the next month or something like that, but I wouldn't wait too long. So that was my presentation. I'm also very aware that most of you will be at work, or not necessarily at work because you're working from home, but are busy with work as well. So we try to cram a lot of the information into a bite-sized presentation. Are there any questions from you guys? I'm happy to answer them now. Let me take a quick sip. Sorry, it took a while to load. After not accepting the offer, is it possible to get how much it has been sold? So that's a good question, Sachin. So most likely the selling party will disclose the purchase price once they've secured the actual deal. So when the purchase contract is signed and the buyer can't pull out anymore, then that's when they'll disclose the price. Because otherwise, so let's say they disclose it earlier on, and then the buyer decides to pull out, then it's kind of like as a disadvantage, because people will then offer around that value and not maybe higher or something like that. So they'll most likely only disclose it when the deal is kind of like secured. No further questions? Yes. Is it possible to win the bid later after accepting other buyers? So the seller can pull out at any time until the purchase contract is signed, right? So that also means that the seller can go with any other offer until the purchase contract is signed. It's not kind of like in good faith if they do that, but it has happened before. Like I've had it happen maybe once in every like 30 or 40 offers that have been accepted. Um, so you can do that. You of course can overbid by a crazy amount if you have a lot of cash, or make it so much more attractive. But yes, the seller can technically accept other offers until that purchase contract is signed. I don't see there's any further questions, so I'm going to wish you good luck as well. Of course, if you need our services, if you would like our services, don't hesitate to reach out. You know where to find us. Again, have a lovely, lovely day and a lovely weekend ahead, and we will be in touch. Take care, everybody.